Welcome to Care, Share and Inspire, our climate wisdom studio live from COP28 in Dubai, UAE. We bring together experts from science, politics and spirituality to explore new solutions for spirituality and the unfolding climate disaster. Myself, I'm Golo Pilz, and I will be your moderator for tonight's session. Well, the COP28, the Conference of Parties organized by the United Nations Framework for Climate, is happening and will be opened tomorrow here in Dubai. We expect more than 75,000 delegates, many head of states, many activists, and so this is one of the largest conferences ever. It will be all about stock taking. Stock taking means we will explore at this conference the promises and pledges of the countries given at the Paris Climate Agreement at COP15. However, this whole conference is overshadowed by the unfolding climate disaster. Everybody knows that the promises which have been given are not enough, and they will bring us right to 3 degrees temperature rise, which will be quite disastrous. So it's all about discussion, improving the pledges, and we have to see how the countries come up with solutions. I'm very glad to have 3 experts with me today. To my left is sitting Hemavati Shekhar. You are a climate advocate living in India and founder and director of Enact Earth Foundation. You have a degree in law and focus on climate and legislation. Next, Dr. Iyad Abu Mogli. He lives in Nairobi, Kenya, and is the founder and director of faith-based Faith for Earth Coalition at UNEP. For the last 40 years, Iyad has been focusing on sustainable development, interfaith collaboration, and innovation. He held various senior positions at the UN and holds also a doctorate degree in engineering. Welcome. And last, Sister Jayanti Kriplani, additional administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris, a spiritual organization with more than 5,000 meditation centers in India and 600 abroad. She is also the director for the activities in Europe and the Middle East. The Brahma Kumaris is accredited to the UNFCCC since 2009, and Sister Jayanti has been almost all the times visiting and participating at the climate conferences. She is also the head of our BK delegation. And this brings me now to our panel discussion. And my first question is to Iyad. You are an engineer and have worked all your life in the field of innovation and transformation. What's your personal motivation to come to the COP, and how does it relate to your work on Faith for Earth Coalition at UNEP?
Thank you very much, Guru, and thank you for inviting me here. Indeed, when I finished my bachelor's degree 40 years ago or more, and I focused on environmental engineering, and I wanted to do something. I was inspired by my father, who was an entrepreneur, and he did not like what's happening around him, and he wanted to change. So I got that energy from him. And, for 40 years, I have been working on environmental issues, water quality, energy and waste management and so on. And I have served in over the past 26 years with the UN. And all of that was inspiring, working with the people. But to tell you the truth, a couple of incidents that I personally witnessed. One of them 3 years ago in my own country, in Jordan, we were hit by a season that we never witnessed. And there was a rainstorm that hit an area for 20 minutes only. And it poured the amount of water that it would do in 1 year. It did in 20 minutes. And because of that incident, 24 kids were killed. So, of course, that is in my country, but it is happening everywhere in Europe, in the US, in Africa, in Asia. It is happening. This year is the highest ever temperature recorded in the history of recording of temperatures. And we know that it is man-made. We know it is because of our own behavior and our own consumption patterns and so on. So what motivates me is I hope that with these discussions, we will reach to a point where we all agree that we need to live on this earth. We don't want to die because somebody is switching their ACs 24 hours, 7 days a week, and 365 days. We don't want to die because somebody is driving their SUVs to go to a shop and buy something. We don't want to die because careless regard to your fellow neighbor, your brother, your sister, here and there. So this is what motivates me. I am coming especially with faith-based organizations and faith leaders because they have the moral inspiration to give people, the love to their neighbors and their fellow citizens and fellow humans. So hopefully with these discussions, and it is happening the first time in history of COPs and conventions that we hold a faith congregation at this large scale. So we want to infuse that moral responsibility to the negotiators.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
infuse moral
responsibility
to the negotiators.
Exactly.
Very nice. This is a wonderful motivation to come here, and that brings me to Hemawati. You have developed quite some expertise in the field of international law, and I guess, right, you're living in Delhi? Yes, and I know that Delhi is suffering quite a lot from toxic air pollution, and I guess that several times you have thought if law cannot help to clean up the city. So what drives you on a personal level to engage in climate change? And please share a bit how it relates to your activities in India.
So for me, I look at law as a force of change and bringing positive change in the society. There is never a law with a bad purpose. A law is brought in always with a good purpose itself. Its implementation could be bad. The people who misuse the law are, bad perpetrators. But the law in itself always has a good purpose to help people who are vulnerable and marginalized. And especially when it comes to Delhi, there's always a huge narrative around, I'm sure everybody would have heard it, stubble burning, because of farmers around the same state. But this always brought to me as a person of law. I've also previously gone to courts through my, an NGO I was working with to, on behalf of these communities, we have something called public interest litigation. But it's, for me, it's the narrative that, people always blame poor farmers who can't afford technology to avoid stubble burning as opposed to rich people driving vehicles, like I mentioned, The narrative is always blame the poor, blame the weak, and law is that one piece in the society that can empower the weak or the poor to stand up for themselves. And this is the same case with climate change as well. It is, I'm sure we've heard of many kids going to courts now, fighting for their future. And this wouldn't have necessarily happened if there was no system of law in place in any country, as a matter of fact. So I'm just, I think when we study law, we are always like taught what the problem in the society is and how law is a solution to deal with such a problem. So that's where I feel like very motivated, especially when it comes to climate change, because the victims have haven't in any manner contributed to climate change, but they're still victims in this particular case.
That's very wonderful motivation to bring justice in climate change. Sister Genti, you are an accomplished spiritual leader, and I know you have great love for nature and a deep feeling also for justice. You have a very busy schedule, but despite that, you still carved out a whole week to come here and be with us at the climate conference. What's your personal motivation to come to the COP, and how is it related to your role as a spiritual leader?
I'd like to begin with a greeting of peace, Om Shanti, to my sister and my brother and all those who are watching and listening. I feel that one of the biggest challenges of our time is the one that we've created for ourselves, and that is climate change. And the sense I have is that if we have created it, it's also our duty and responsibility to do something about it, to alleviate the suffering that it's causing. And I know that a change of consciousness really changes attitude and awareness, and therefore your lifestyle. And I think that if people can really understand one thing, that our peace and happiness lies inside. It doesn't come from shopping, it doesn't come from flying a private jet or any of these things. It's actually deep inside of us. But because we've grown up in such a materialistic world, and it's got worse and worse day by day in a sense, all our attention is focused on the outside, and we've lost touch with the being that we are within. And because my own experience of spirituality was a very dramatic change in my lifestyle very quickly, so that from somebody living in London with all the comforts that that can bring, I decided I wanted to simplify my life and focus on the inner being. And so I think that it was so easy and natural for me. It can be very easy and simple for everyone else also. So my hope is that as more and more people understand that A, we are responsible for what's happening to the planet, and B, we can change ourselves very quickly just by coming to the awareness of the spiritual identity of the inner being. And we can have all the happiness and joy that we're looking for within, and then become instruments to share it with others also. So I think that the UN climate change conferences really need that spiritual input. And so I've been very pleased that for some years now, over recent times, religious and spiritual leaders have been invited to speak on panels at the UN, because it then allows us to share that awareness of the sanctity of nature and our role as responsible instruments to care for nature.
A wonderful motivation to bring a spiritual awareness to the climate conference. Yeah, this brings me to the next question. Sustainable living needs change of habits, and also our behavior has to change. One of the most difficult things many have tried. And religion, on the other hand, has also a stewardship towards the creation. Technology and science is also quite clear what has to be done. But often those ideas cannot be understood by ordinary people, by farmers. I remember in India, ordinary people, they don't know much about climate change, what is going on. How to bridge the gap and bring knowledge and expertise on the ground so really people can adopt it, how to raise awareness for the common people.
Well, indeed, I mean, we need to think holistically. You mentioned technology, you mentioned science and policy, why we are here to actually adopt policies to change things. So these are very important things, but what is missing is the spiritual and moral component that brings all of those in the benefit of the entire of humanity and not for the benefits of one economy or the other. What got us here is actually our daily practices, either as individuals, institutions, or member states and countries. So sustainable living is something that is not new, right? And it's a science that have been discussed and researched, and there are guidelines and so on. But always the missing component is the moral component in, the practices of the people. Even if you're asked not to generate waste, right? If I tell you, well, science tells you that 30% or 40% of food is wasted on an annual basis or within any given community. And there is a policy against that, right? You might or you might not follow the policy because it's if you've not been watched by policymakers or police who fine you and so on. So when you hide, you might do it behind the doors. But what prevents you, even if you are inside a room that is closed between four walls, is your moral and spiritual beliefs, right? So that is important to go into the sustainable living and sustainable practices, which is very difficult to do, right? But what is easy to do to convince people is to go back to their spiritualities. We're not, as we've been accused, that the UN is coming into this and bringing all religions together to create one United Nations religion. That is not the case. We're saying you have religions that are centuries old. There are principles that you and billions of people adopt. Go back to them. We don't want you to convert from here to there or accept this idea or that idea. Accept your own idea, because in all religions, and we have documents and research and publications that tells you that almost all religions, I can say all religions, but let me say almost all religions, they do instruct you to live in harmony with nature. And that is the basic principle for behavioral change and transformational change in the sustainable living.
That's a very interesting idea. Bring back morals and ethics into the life of people, and they will use clean technology. Wonderful. Hemawati, there has been recently a very spectacular environmental case. I think it was in 2021. It was against Royal Shell in the Netherlands. You probably heard about this. And it was brought forward by the Friends of the Earth. And the court ordered Shell to reduce its emissions by 45% until 2030. Not only the emissions from its production, but also from the goods they are selling. It is considered to be one of the first major climate change litigation which is running against the company. And my question to you is international environmental law in its present form powerful enough to turn the tide?
If I'm being honest, no. International law is a culmination of the political will of all the countries that come together to form it. And that is why people have been going to courts, and that is why climate change litigation becomes very, very important to seek justice. Because even if you go to many countries, they don't have a law on climate change itself. Despite a lot of commitments that has been made under Paris and the last 2 years, Glasgow Climate Pact, Sharm el-Sheikh Implementation Plan, and there's so many commitments, but does that translate to something within their domestic law for them to get their companies or their industries to behave a certain way? It's not always binding unless it's a law. If it's a policy, it's a vision document for the government itself on how they wish to move forward. And that is why there's a lack of political will, not just internationally, but nationally as well, for the governments to do something very concrete about climate change. And what people have realized that is that the only space that can ask the governments to forcefully take certain action is the courts. So and courts have been open to people to, complain against the government or industries. And this is one of the best examples of how a justice system itself has been used. And courts, many courts across the world have been very supportive, and they've been very creative in order to come up with orders that make sure that there are decisions made against fossil fuel companies or the governments even for lack of commitments. Or there was a case in Germany itself as to how, say for example, I'm a young person and my lifestyle, I cannot have the same lifestyle as my ancestors did, because I'm forced to live a certain way because of climate change. And that is denying me of a certain freedom of choice of the kind of life I want to live. And these are the rights of future generations that are being impacted. And no government is going to come up with a law to protect all of that very easily.
So that's very interesting. There is a difference between national law and international law, and it's connected to the political will. And you told us just now, still a lot has to be done in order to make the law so powerful that they can really change, let's say, governments' policies or companies' policies. Sister Genti, we heard about the international law and its power and its impact. But there's also a very powerful spiritual law. The law, or we can say the rule of karma. And how is karma? Apparently right now the world has a lot of bad karma because the situation is not so good. How is karma related to climate change? And how could this be transformed?
Right at the very beginning, you mentioned the word stewardship. And this idea exists in all the different traditions, that human beings didn't make nature, but nature is there as a gift from the divine. And our duty is to be able to care for nature, to love nature, respect nature, and to be able to treat it with compassion and kindness. Now, all of that is totally missing. There's been exploitation, there's been violence, there's been aggression. All of this has happened against animals, all forms of life, but also the elements of the earth and nature itself. And so we've destroyed our own home. And we're seeing the result of that today in the imbalance of nature. And so where we started, now whenever you call that, but at the start, there's a period that's been described as a time of abundance, in which there was a reverence for nature, but nature also gave of herself with abundance and love, and human beings responded with gratitude and respect. And all that has been forgotten. Maybe once a year we have a Thanksgiving ceremony, but that's also become very commercial. And so I think nature is giving us a very, very big warning signal that it's time for us to change our way of living and to come back to a style in which there's respect for nature and all forms of life and all creatures, so that there's compassion and non-violence in our behavior towards human beings, but also towards animals and other creatures and nature. And so if we come back to that, I'm sure that we have within our capacity the possibility of restoring that balance and coming back to a state in which there can be harmony inside, but also harmony with nature outside. And so the big spiritual lesson to learn is that because we've broken the laws, now nature isn't following any system or any law and order, but everything's come into a state of disorder and chaos.
So literally the actions of the past are forcing us or teaching us right now to change our lifestyle.
I hope so. I don't see
Very
it
interesting.
happening yet, except for a small number of people, but I hope so.
Well, certainly nature is becoming more and more forceful and sending us a very clear message. Everybody talks about climate change and what happens and the hurricanes and the destruction and this and that. So it's quite a pressing issue now, and apparently it will become more in the future.
That's true, but I'm just seeing that most people don't make that connection of what they have done to nature and what nature is doing to them. And so I see that this is something that has to be highlighted so that people understand that, now after a lot of skepticism and criticism, people are now accepting that climate change is due to human actions. But then to come to a personal state where I take responsibility and I say, this is what I have done. How am I going to redress the balance and sort it out at this moment?
In Christianity, there's a saying, as we sow, so we will reap.
Yes.
And that's happening right now. Iyad, this brings me to my third question to you. Humanity seems to be caught in a maze of reasons not to act what we actually understand. And it seems to be blocked. Since 30 years we know what has to be done, but somehow it's not happening. Something seems to be missing. Is it moral? Is it ethics? Or is it even a higher consciousness? And what role faith-based organizations can play? Can you share your vision? What type of paradigm shift is actually required?
Well, if everybody now says that we are facing a crisis, a climate crisis, or even biodiversity crisis, or pollution crisis, or it's a crisis of humanity, to tell you the truth. It's a crisis of ethics and morals. It is a crisis of apathy towards others. It's a crisis of indifference. It's a crisis of the individual. And as Sister Gianta said, we're realizing now that we have done something wrong. But unfortunately, we're realizing it because we are feeling the impact, right? We're feeling it, and all of this, attention to it. It is because now it's reaching to the rich countries, to the rich people. It's hitting them where they, feel, the droughts in the US, the floods in Europe, and that's, I believe, unfortunate. Of course, we don't want it to happen. But it's a wake-up call for humanity to understand. But it doesn't have to be that way. For example, in 1990, when some scientists, they discovered that there is a problem with the ozone layer, right? The ozone layer is so far. Nobody feels its impact. There is impact on the skin and so on, but it is not as massive as climate change. But yet, scientists, because it does not impact economy, it does not impact, the well-being of those who have, they went and made a commitment to reduce or, bridge that gap of the ozone layer. And they did it, right? They did it because they believed in science. Now, they don't believe in science, although they're feeling it. Now, once it starts hitting every day, they will wake up. So there's the crisis of humanity and the crisis of knowledge that we started talking about, and belief in the science and how we connect science to policy, but also to ethics and moral responsibility. That, nexus is very important, right? So whenever you take a policy, it is not an individual policy that, benefit an institution or a country. It should benefit humanity. We are all on one small earth. If we look at the universe, it's very small, And if we, abuse all of its resources, we cannot borrow from Mars, or we cannot borrow from another cosmetic system. We have to live within those resources. So humanity needs to wake up.
So it boils down to personal moral behavior and action. Wonderful. Hemawati, you're engaged a lot with the youngsters here at the climate conference. And on one side, we can see a lot of anxiety. Actually, it's a new phenomenon, climate anxiety, and there are even psychologists which are dealing with that. And on the other side, youngsters have a lot of new ideas. Can you share a bit, what are you doing if you meet somebody who has climate anxiety, who is fear of the future? And what input or what momentum for change can come from the younger generation? So actually a twofold question. How you deal with the anxiety of youngsters on one side, and what you believe can be the input from the younger generation, what they can teach us oldies.
Okay, that's a difficult one. As for us, it's a matter of whether or not we have a future in itself. And I was recently at a conference in the MENA region. It was happening in Egypt, and you see a lot of conflict in the region itself. And we were having a conversation about, how can we think about climate change when there are wars happening? And somebody responded saying that, if you're not going to die by a war, you're going to die of climate change. And the entire conversation amongst young people has been like, how are you going to die? Which is very, very depressing. Not many look forward to like a future. Everybody's, lost hope or is very depressed. But what we do is, at least with a community that we have created, like, the people I work with, they're all very inspiring. People have not given up hope. It's not just for us. We are fighting for people who haven't even born, who are not on this planet yet. And, for things that we don't know about, it's the little things. Like we are all like working in a volunteer space. Nobody gets paid. We have university students skipping exams and coming to COPs to fight for a cause, or, despite doing a 9-to-5 job, still coming back home and volunteering on, with organizations or movements that work on climate change. And they're so invested in the process. It gives you hope because you're not alone in the journey. It's a community that has created. And people with many, many difficult situations continuing to do that. I have people who have survived wars continue volunteering, for the cause. So it's that way, I think the community gives you hope, the community we're a part of. And I think that's how we deal with anxiety as well.
That's a wonderful answer, to create a powerful community and work together. This gives you hope. Sister Janti, there's a famous pop song written by Betty Newsom, but as often a man got the credit. It was James Brown, and the song was It's a Man's World. The lyrics is quite revealing, and man built all modern gadgets, but without the woman, they are nothing. And without the woman, he's lost in wilderness, and he's lost in bitterness. He's lost. You are the head of an international organization led by women. Man dominates politics and industries. Woman seems to be more open to spirituality and more open to the needed lifestyle change. Is humanity lost if we not bring women forward?
In China, they say that half the sky is held up by women. And so just imagine if the women are not in the picture, the sky comes falling down. And in a way, that's what's happened with nature, that because women haven't had a say in all the major decisions that happen to everything in the world, they've been sidelined and marginalized in a big, big way. And so we see the state of the world. And so I believe absolutely that it's women's role now to move forward into positions of leadership. In the Brahma Kumaris, we have men and women who come together and they work together, they live together. But the leadership and administration is in the hands of women, and the teaching is in the hands of women usually also. And so I see that it's happening in this organization, but it's something that needs to be translated into all the major organizations of the world also, so that they can bring their talents. And I believe very deeply that the soft skills that are needed so much in the world today, and the qualities, the feminine principles that are needed, compassion and love and justice, care for all, inclusivity, these are very feminine traits that men can also have, but it's important to be able to allow women to play that role, so that together, then it's not only women on their own, it has to be with our brothers also, but then men and women coming together, sharing their particular talents and skills. Together we can create a better world. And I know for sure that we will together create that world. That's the vision I hold.
Wonderful. So bring the woman forward and bring the soft skill forward. Time is slowly getting short, and so Iyad, please share in one word your good wish for this COP, how it will become successful, and share your good wish for this world.
Well, I hope that this COP will be the COP of the realization of reality, what is happening.
One word.
Implementation.
Implementation.
Yes.
And the world?
Well, peace.
Peace. Implementation and peace. How wonderful. Hemawati, what is your good wish for the COP, and what is your good wish for the world?
So sorry. Accountability.
Accountability for the COP and for the world?
Kindness.
Kindness. How lovely. Accountability and kindness. And Sister Jenti, what is your good word or wish for this COP, and also your wish for a better world?
For COP, it is that there's a realization we are one family, one home, one planet, and we work together to have a better place for all. And for the world, that there should be justice and truth returning to this world of ours.
Wonderful. You all gave such great inspirations for the conference and for this world. And time is ticking. And Sister Jenti, would it be possible you can guide a meditation for a couple of minutes and take us towards a new world of peace, love, and harmony?
Thank you. Just carry on sitting comfortably, but let the body be balanced and still, so both feet on the ground is best. And just let the mind go on an inner journey. I'll share my own thoughts and invite you to follow these ideas. I watch my mind, and as I watch, the speed of my thoughts slows down. And there seems to be a gap between one thought and the other. And as the space between the thoughts becomes longer, there's space for experience. On this inner journey, I hold the thought of peace. And I begin to appreciate that peace lies within. I am a being of peace. But now, as I sit in a quiet space, I can feel it. I can remind myself of my natural identity. and the experience of peace opens the door to the awareness of love, of truth, of joy. And these vibrations are not just for me, but these vibrations transform the atmosphere of the room I'm in. But these vibrations extend further. And our vibrations coming together multiply the impact, and peace and love and truth spread far beyond these walls into the world out there. And the world moves from a space of darkness to a world of light. I hold this awareness and now coming back to the moment here and now, I resolve to share these qualities in my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sister Janti. What a wonderful ending for our panel discussion. Thanks a lot also to Hemavati and Iyad for coming and joining us. And I shall not forget our patrons and the sponsors, the Brahma Kumaris Kaltaru Tree Plantation Program, the Brahma Kumaris Environmental Initiative, and Yogis for Future and India Care Trust. Special thanks also to our host, the Raja Yoga Center here in Dubai, and all the many volunteers behind the camera and the helpers who made this panel discussion possible. Please do join us tomorrow at the same time for another interesting session on Care, Share and Inspire live studio from Dubai. Please visit our webpage www.echo.brahmakumaris.org for details and the program. Last not least, thanks to our audience for staying all the time with us. Thanks very much and good night from Dubai.